I quit my job, which was the first and most pleasant thing I did. There is always a silver lining in every dark cloud that tries to fog you. My bosses and coworkers were shocked. I gave no reason. Pity doesn't appeal to me. When I departed, I left them with the impression that I was chasing my dreams. There were meetings where they offered to raise my pay, and they demanded to know who had lured me away. I just smiled and signed a non-compete contract for a tidy sum. It's strange when you see your true dollar value on paper. It's way too large and at the same time way too small. Some things were easier for me than they would be for most in my situation. I had no close family, which was a blessing. My friends were more like acquaintances. I would meet them for cards or movies, but never really shared any intense bonding moments. They could call me to jump their car or collect the mail when they went on vacation. They knew better than to expect a shoulder to cry on when real problems occurred. I didn't share mine, so I expected not to share theirs. Needless to say, no one was particularly upset when I picked up and moved 3 states away. I bought an old house, one of those money pits in need of a ton of work. I had often spent Sunday mornings watching home repair and remodeling shows. I wasted years dreaming of becoming a rehab master, buying them, fixing them, and flipping them. That was what I really wanted to do for a living, and that is how I would spend the rest of my life. The real estate agent thought I was insane. She tried to steer me toward less stressful properties and just couldn't wrap her head around my dream. Of course, I got the place for a song, so her commission may have been her impetus to try to sell me something a bit more pricey. I was the proud owner of a home in need of everything redone. I moved in without electricity and only one working bathroom. It was simply heaven. A new roof and upgrading the electrical were the first things on my to-do list. I would have to contract out both. I would help with the labor, but I needed professionals to guide me through the critical steps. The roofer could come out immediately. The electrical was a different story. The contractors were backed up and didn't expect to get to me for 2 weeks. I sweetened the bid price, and suddenly someone else's electricity was on the back burner. I really didn't care how much it cost. I just knew I needed 20 amp service as soon as possible. The electrician would arrive in 2 days with an estimated 3 days of installation. Without power, I couldn't cook, and refrigeration lasted as long as ice cubes in the cooler. You can only eat so many peanut butter and jelly sandwiches before your tongue revolts. I decided eating at least 1 meal a day in town would suffice. Junction City was a small town lying outside the normal world as I knew it, far enough from the city so it couldn't be considered a suburb, but close enough it wasn't the outback. A basically rural population with a 4-block downtown. It would have been considered quaint if you didn't have to drive past the Pleasure Palace on the way into town. Just on the outskirts, well before any of the residential streets, lay a rectangular metal building. It in and of itself was unappealing, with its surrounding chain-link fence and bright lights. Only the sign with Pleasure Palace in large letters was welcoming. A pair of stocking legs was artfully placed underlining the words. At night, the sign could be seen for a mile. During the day, you could drive right past and miss it. The first night I drove past, I hadn't been to a strip club in years. The last time was a bachelor party for an acquaintance of mine some 20 years ago. I remember getting stinking drunk and parting with $400. All that cash, and I left as unsatisfied as the law would allow. It was still a somewhat fond memory. I had always assumed the memory was better than the night. I ate at a burger joint named Rusty's that first night. It was a family-owned place with all the ambience of a country kitchen, down to the red and white checkered tablecloths. The waitress, a high school girl with way too many freckles, quizzed me about what I was doing in Junction City. It was a small town, and I guessed good gossip was worth its weight in gold. I decided there was only one secret worth keeping anymore, and dished out the rest to her. It got me a free slice of apple pie for dessert, a welcome to the town slice. I graciously accepted and really began to enjoy the down-home atmosphere they fostered. The pie was excellent. Most people tend to spare the sugar and cinnamon when they make an apple pie. not Rusty's. It was sinfully good, with tart apples offset by just the right amount of diet-busting sugar and plenty of cinnamon. Sleep was comfortable since the weather had held. I knew I couldn't be lucky for long and hoped nature would cooperate until the power was restored. I already had a new furnace in the basement waiting patiently for energy and ductwork. I spent the next day cutting holes in the first floor and installing the necessary ductwork. I would have to put another unit in the attic for the second floor, but I would deal with that as soon as the power was on. It was an old house that seemed to resent modern conveniences. I would merge it with the future as best I could. I was exhausted by 3 o'clock. It had been a while since I had done much physical labor. Working with your hands above your head is pretty exhausting when you're not used to it. I showered and decided to have an early dinner. When I entered Rusty's, I was greeted by name. I had the same waitress, the same meal, and this time I paid for my slice of pie. I received a strong helping of knowledge about the upcoming harvest festival. Since I was now a regular, I guess the waitress thought it was necessary to keep me informed. I smiled and read her name tag Diana. I tried to set that to memory. I liked the food and intended to return. Remembering names seemed to be a pastime in town, so I felt I needed to participate. On the way back, while driving into the blazing sun, I didn't pass up the Pleasure Palace. It was early, and I wasn't tired. Without power, there was little to keep me entertained at home. I figured a few hours at a strip club would be less boring. I don't know what I expected, but the reality was quite different. I entered from the bright sunny day into an almost pitch-black dungeon. I removed my glasses, thinking my lenses had darkened during the walk from the car. Sadly, the view was no better. A flash from behind me ruined my slowly adjusting eyes. "Hello," came a pleasant voice from an equally pleasant woman who had just entered behind me. I wondered if she was a dancer at first, but her bearing indicated more authority. The door quickly closed, and I was blind again. From what I could tell, her name was Maddie. It was illuminated on her black shorts in white letters. The black lights that made it so hard to see gave me a beacon to follow. It was fascinating watching the M and Y changing elevations as she headed to the only brightly lit space in the building. I almost looked away shyly, but caught myself. "You're in a strip club, you idiot. You're supposed to look." I enjoyed the view as it pulled ahead smartly. She obviously had better eyes than mine. I was just beginning to make out the bottles on glowing shelves when I ran into a dark cloth chair. I scooted around it and continued to the brightest location in the long room, the bar. As I neared, my vision improved dramatically. I looked around and saw a mostly empty place. There were chairs for about 50 people surrounding a long stage stretching to the center of the room. There was another set of empty chairs on the other side of the aisle that ran around the stage chairs, but up against the wall. I knew it was early, but I wasn't expecting to be the only guy in the place. Center stage was never a place for me. I thought about skipping the whole thing and leaving before I got uncomfortable, but tossed those thoughts aside. I figured I knew how to drink without making a total fool of myself. I grabbed a stool at the bar and was pleasantly surprised to see Maddie behind it. "Can I get you a drink?" she asked as she slid right up. There was no one else to serve. Her blonde hair was pulled back and tied with something invisible. She had a cute face and a fuller figure than you would expect to see dancing on a pole. Little did she know, I would have tipped well to see her dance. She had a flow about her that just exuded sexiness. I looked at the wall of bottles, trying to decide what to drink. I fell back on something I drank years ago and said, "I think I'll just have a rum and coke." I knew I had a tendency to look away when I was uncomfortable, so I chastised myself. At the end of the bar was an extremely good-looking, tall blonde with a perfect figure, encased in a bikini that wouldn't be suitable for most beaches. I didn't like her immediately and tried not to attract her attention. Women like her belonged on a shelf encased in plastic. I rarely found them warm, even when they gave me the time of day. Just eye candy as far as I was concerned. She was taller than I was anyway. Luckily, Miss Perfect was flirting with what looked like the manager of the establishment. Maddie returned with my rum and coke and grabbed the $20 I left on the bar. "That will be $7, she said, making eye contact during the exchange. I barely remembered that I meant to do that too. She returned with the change, and I made an effort to say thank you to establish contact. She returned my smile and went back to the corner with Ms. Perfect. I realized I was interrupting dinner as I saw the styrofoam containers open and forks going to work. I wheeled my comfy bar stool around to look down the long stage. Little had changed. The place was still quiet, but I could now see I wasn't the only customer. A couple of men were seated in the comfortable velvet chairs, sipping drinks. There were a couple of flat-panel TVs at awkward angles, displaying what looked like a little league game. With summer nearing its end, I suspected it was some sort of regional or national championship. I wasn't sure if watching that was worth the $7 I'd just spent on the drink. If Miss Perfect was the only dancer here, I might have more fun trying to pole dance myself. A DJ hidden somewhere announced that the beautiful Rebecca would be on stage. Miss Perfect dropped her fork, closed her styrofoam dinner container, and walked casually to the stage. She wasn't my type, but she was well built. I rotated my bar seat and watched her. The girl could move as well as she looked. She had perfect silicone breasts that defied gravity, and her hips undulated in a very seductive manner. If I were still a teenager, I would have been thrilled to see her. At my age, she remained like candy, very nice to look at but definitely someone to be kept at arm's length. The other two patrons had other ideas. They both moved to the stage seats and began tipping dollar bills. I wondered briefly if her breasts were as hard to the touch as they looked. I decided it wasn't worth the dollar to find out. I was content with the free view. I turned back to the bar and raised my empty glass to Maddie. She smiled and started making me a fresh drink. The bar had a mirror behind the bottles that allowed me to watch the stage without turning around. Miss Perfect was playing with her fork, trying to coax more dollars out of her admirers. It seemed to be working. "Are you having fun?" Maddie asked as she placed the fresh drink in front of me, collecting the empty one, and taking $7 from what I had left on the bar. "Well, I'm not bored," I admitted. I wasn't thrilled with my decision to stop in, but I wasn't ready to leave just yet. "Is it always this quiet?" "We pick up when the sun goes down," Maddie replied. She didn't immediately return to the corner of the bar, so I assumed she was willing to talk. "Are there other girls dancing today, or do I have to wait for the vampires?" I said humorously. I don't think she cared for the humor. "Most of the guys like Rebecca," she added, pointing to the stage with the bar rag in her hand. I let my eyes follow the rag back to the stage. Rebecca was pulling her bikini bottoms to the side, trying to urge more dollars her way. I looked back with a sardonic grin. I know I don't look like a guy who should be picky, but she's a bit too Barbie for me, I said. Maddie laughed. I didn't think she expected anyone to make that comment. I smiled and took another sip of my drink. I noticed Maddie was making the drinks pretty strong. I guess that helped loosen the customers' wallets. "I've never heard Rebecca described that way," Maddie said happily. "She's a nice girl, though, not like you would expect." I smelled a sales pitch. I just shook my head. "I'd rather talk to you," I stated. I saw her cringe at the comment. Only I could overstep in a strip club. "I don't dance, and my clothes stay on when you tip," Maddie informed me very clearly. I was a little surprised by the venom I sensed at the end of her statement. I raised my hand in surrender. I meant nothing by it. "I should have kept my mouth shut," I said. I swung my chair around and looked blankly at the stage. I figured I would finish my drink and get out of there. It was a stupid idea in the first place. This is a perfect example of why I have acquaintances instead of friends. My mouth always moves faster than my brain, and people always misinterpret my comments. It took me about half a minute to down the rest of my drink. I was thankful it wouldn't be a long ride home. I decided I had outgrown strip clubs. I placed my glass on the bar and left the $6 as a tip, my way of apologizing for the unintended slight. Life was too short to let a situation grow bigger than needed. I almost made it to the door when a large man, linebacker large, stepped out from behind a dark counter. I guessed he doubled as the DJ and bouncer. At first, I thought he was just leaving his booth, but he blocked my way out. "Excuse me," I said politely, making a move to pass him. He grabbed my arm, not strongly like he obviously could, but carefully just to stop me. "Maddie wants to have a word with you," he said, nodding toward the bar. I looked back at the bar, and Maddie was waving for me to come back. I looked back at the mountain before me. "Look, I'm just trying to leave. I left a good tip. She'll just have to accept that as my apology," I said, hoping this wasn't going to get blown out of proportion. I was surprised when he let go of my arm. "Okay, but I think she wants to apologize to you," he said, stepping aside to let me pass. I looked back at the bar, and Maddie waved me in again. I thought now I had to go back. I took a deep breath and walked back to the bar. "I think I misunderstood you," Maddie said, apologizing. "I was wrong, and I'd like to buy you a drink. I certainly don't want you to leave angry with us." She gave me a forced smile, clearly uncomfortable with the apology. The $6 was still on the bar, and a fresh drink was waiting. I considered just accepting her apology and leaving. There was nothing here that really appealed to me anymore. Maddie wasn't even appealing now. The math was easier when I added in the dark house I would return to. "Okay, I guess we did get off on the wrong foot," I said with a smile as I sat back down. "I do appreciate the drink. It's a nice gesture." Maddie's smile became genuine. She nodded and headed back to the end of the bar. Business was business, and I'm sure they had me sized up for more than $20. Miss Perfect finished her set and collected the money from the stage. I watched in the mirror as she reassembled her clothing and carefully walked off the stage in her heels. She was making a beeline for me, and I'd really prefer she didn't. I saw Maddie wave her off out of the corner of my eye. Rebecca caught the signal and changed direction. I guessed Maddie and I now understood each other. I was feeling no pain when the DJ announced a new dancer, Lucia. I swiveled in my chair a little too far and looked toward the stage. An olive-skinned woman with rich black hair cascading down her back climbed the stairs. She was dressed in flowing translucent silks and various shades of pink. Fleetwood Mac's Gypsy began to play over the sound system. Lucia began twirling, letting the silk spread out in a Stevie Nicks impression. Her face was more mature than Miss Perfect's, and her curves were more womanly, at least what I could see as the silken wings flew about. "She's not a Barbie doll," Maddie said from behind me. I looked back, and Maddie pushed my $6 toward me, gesturing to the stage. I smiled and pushed the money back at her. "Can't spend it in a grave," I thought. I winked at Maddie and moved to a seat by the stage. Lucia had already lost some of her silken coverings. As she moved toward me, she gave me a little private show. My eyes were level with her feet, and I noticed a small patch of four-leaf clovers tattooed on her right ankle. When I looked up into her eyes, I didn't see any hint of Irish. I guessed she was Hispanic. Lucia wrapped one of her silken wings around my neck and held it there as she stepped back, disrobing a little more. I was alone at the stage. The others had probably spent their money on Miss Perfect. Lucia took a quick spin around the pole in the center, leaving the rest of her silks behind. She returned to me in a dark pink bikini, the top holding what looked like real breasts. I was mesmerized by her beauty when she leaned over, her lips close to my ear. "It's usually customary to tip," she whispered with a slight accent, reinforced by a smile that was dangerously cute. I chuckled a bit, buzzed, and remembered where I was. I withdrew a $20 bill and placed it on the stage, which earned me a bigger smile. She lay on her side, facing me, and took my hand. She caressed herself, guiding my hand up her thigh, along her hip, up her stomach, and finally to her breast. It felt real, not a hard silicone imitation. "Untie me," Lucia whispered and released my hand. I pulled the strings of the two bow knots that held her top on. She rolled her body and teased me, and I enjoyed the private show, smiling as I watched her midriff undulate to the music. This woman had muscles that motivated her curves. Some men sat down on the other side of the stage, and I saw Lucia's eyes glance in their direction. I knew where I was, but a twinge of unfounded jealousy crept into my consciousness. I wanted Lucia to myself, but my illusion of being special was fading. Her eyes returned to mine, and she dropped her arm, taking my hands in hers and running them up her sides, almost tickling them. She caressed on cue, which excited me even though I knew it was all an illusion. "I'll be right back," Lucia said with a smile. I watched her dance over to the other patron. I admit I was feeling selfish and had no desire to share. I knew that wasn't part of the strip club experience, but I brewed it anyway. I grabbed my drink and sat away from the stage, sulking a bit. After a few minutes, I laughed at myself. Here I was, thinking I was bonding with an onstage stripper when all she was after was what was in my wallet. The drink was going to my head, and I was letting the fantasy become a bit too real. I saw Lucia turn back to where I was sitting and frown a bit before collecting a few more dollars from the other patron. At least my $20 held some sway over her thoughts. She really was a fine-looking woman. I loved how she moved her curvy hips and how her calf muscles worked to keep her confident on her heels. As Lucia's set ended and she walked off the stage toward where I suspected the DJ booth was, I began to consider leaving again. I had no idea what I expected coming here, but I wasn't as happy as I thought I should be. It all seemed a bit superficial, and I had only experienced a brief moment of titillation. I felt more relaxed at Rusty's, and the conversation was better. I had just emptied my drink when Lucia walked up. She was wearing the same pink bikini top, but had a silky sarong wrapped around her waist. She sat in the chair next to mine, and gently placed her hand on my thigh, lightly stroking it. "You left," Lucia remarked, pouting slightly. I decided to be honest. There was no reason to pretend to be someone else here. I'm selfish that way. "I didn't want to share," I said, hoping I didn't sound too intoxicated. It had been a while since I'd had a lot of rum. Her hand moved higher on my thigh, and the sensation was pleasurable. "Well, I'm here now," Lucia said with a smile. "You have my full attention." I considered that for a moment. I liked the idea, but I knew it was a delusion to think it was anything more than a one-sided business arrangement, at least in terms of profit. Time was too short. I decided to embrace the illusion for a while. "Now that makes me happy," I said with a smile. "Can I get you a drink?" I knew I could. It was one of the many ways to drain my wallet, but it didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. It's not like I needed money for retirement anymore. "Sure," Lucia responded, waving Maddie over. I ordered another rum and coke, this time with a glass of water. Lucia ordered a fruit cocktail, which I suspected was alcohol-free, and she would likely split the cost with the bar. I was happily cynical. "So, do you have any kids?" I asked. Lucia seemed a bit taken aback by the question, which wasn't something a guy with a lady's hand high on his thigh would normally ask. I decided I wanted a normal conversation with a pretty girl. "I have a girl," Lucia smiled, and I saw a hint of pride in her brown eyes. "I work here to help put her through college." That took me by surprise. She didn't look old enough. "Either she's a prodigy or you're a bit older than you look," I said with a touch of whimsy. Her hand gently rested on my thigh. "No, my baby is smart, but not that smart," Lucia said with a warm smile, switching into mom mode. I found it endearing. "She will be the first one to graduate from college in our family." Her eyes lit up as her hand moved away from my thigh, and she began emphasizing her words with her hands. She's still figuring out whether she wants to be a lawyer or an English teacher. Being only a sophomore, she has some time to decide. I was so proud when she got accepted. My mama cried. She even received a partial scholarship because she plays viola in the orchestra. I can tell you this, she won't be dancing for a living if I have anything to say about it. Lucia's accent became more pronounced as she continued. "I kind of want her to meet a nice guy. someone who will have an education like hers. I don't want her worrying about rent and struggling through life like I did. She had a tough childhood and deserves more than I could provide," Lucia said. "She sounds wonderful," I replied. Maddie arrived with our drinks and gave Lucia a sharp look. I suspected the conversation was meant to lead to a private dance. I paid for the drinks and tipped generously, hoping Maddie would let it slide for now. "Is Maddie the owner?" I asked. Maddie seemed to be in control of things and was able to offer the free drink without needing approval. "Yes," Lucia said quietly. "She's a good boss, maybe a little pushy." Lucia's hand briefly touched my thigh as she spoke. "We do have private dances here," she said, her voice trailing off as if unsure about mixing her daughter's work with this topic. "How much?" I asked. $20 per song," Lucia responded with a bit more enthusiasm. I reached into my wallet and counted out $200. "That's for the next 10 songs, I said. "We can talk without financial worries." I took a sip of my water, trying to balance out the effects of the alcohol. "You want to pay me to talk?" Lucia asked, incredulous. "Yep," I replied with a smile. "I just want to have a conversation with a charming woman. Unless that's too unconventional for you." Lucia smiled as I clarified my intention. I had decided that while I enjoyed the entertainment, my main interest was in genuine companionship, especially since the financial aspect was no longer a concern. Lucia took my money up to the bar, and I saw Maddie shrug and nod, likely discussing my unusual request. When Lucia returned, she extended her hand and mentioned, "We still have the private room." I allowed her to help me up from my seat and took my water with me. She led me along the stage and up a flight of stairs. At the end of the hall, she pushed aside a curtain to reveal a room with only a small table and a bed. "Please, make yourself comfortable," Lucia said as she placed my drink on the table. I lay on my back with a small throw pillow under my head while Lucia settled next to me on her side. Her hand rested gently on my chest. "So, what would you like to talk about?" Lucia asked. Strangely, I found myself more interested in listening than talking. "You were telling me about your daughter," I prompted, hoping to continue the conversation. "I can't believe you're old enough to have a daughter in college," I said. "I had her when I was 17, Lucia replied calmly. "It was an accident. I was at a party, and the guy left as soon as he found out. My mama and I raised her together. I never finished high school because of it. That's why I'm determined to make sure Sophia finishes college." Lucia's hand adjusted my shirt, and as she gently rested her hand on my belly, I found the touch enjoyable, so I didn't say anything. "You work every day?" I asked. "No, I'm off on Wednesdays and Thursdays." "What's your name, strange man who only wants to talk?" Lucia asked, her warm hand resting on my belly. "Todd, strange woman who agreed to talk," I answered, trying to keep things light. Her fingers lightly traced my side, making me shiver. "Well, Todd, what do you do for a living?" Lucia asked, her hand moving across my chest. Her touch was soft and comforting, and I was more appreciative of it than I had anticipated. "I used to be a bond broker," I replied. "Now I'm trying my hand at rehabbing houses." "You must be doing well to afford such conversations," Lucia said with a smile, her hand resting above my belt. The touch was pleasant, and I didn't stop her. "I guess you could say I'm doing all right this year," I responded vaguely. I had a lot of money to spend since the future is secure. "No family?" Lucia asked, steering the conversation back to me. "No, just a cousin I haven't seen in 20 years, I said, then tried to redirect the conversation. "Tell me about your mama." "Not much to say," Lucia replied. "She works hard at the same hospital she's been at for 30 years, handling laundry and cleaning rooms. She never misses a day of work. That's my mama." I loved the way she said mama with a hint of her Hispanic accent. "So, what are your plans once your daughter graduates?" I asked. Lucia's fingers brushed just under the waistband of my pants, causing me to take a breath. She smiled at my reaction. "I haven't thought that far ahead. I've just had that one goal since she was born, Lucia said. Lucia removed the top strings of her bikini and smiled. I know you appreciate this. Feel free to enjoy it while we talk. I reached over and caressed her. I'll need to work here for a few more years to pay off Maddie, Lucia said. After that, I might consider waitressing or something. You owe Maddie money? I asked, surprised. My attention was on her, and it felt good. She loaned me tuition money for Sophia, Lucia admitted. She doesn't charge me interest, but I promise to work here until it's paid off. Lucia's hand moved deeper, sending pleasant sensations. I figure I'll be here another 4 or 5 years unless more customers prefer talking, she said with a laugh. You seem to like being touched, Lucia observed as she helped me remove my shirt. I didn't resist, feeling the effects of the rum. Lucia removed the bottom strings of her top and tossed it aside, then lay on top of me, her eyes close to mine. Why did you decide to quit being a broker? Lucia asked. Her proximity and attention felt comforting after a long time without such affection. I've always dreamed of rehabbing old houses, I replied, looking between her eyes and her cleavage. I figured it was now or never. Lucia's leg brushed between mine, creating a pleasing friction. Her lips lightly grazed my ear, and I could hear her breathing softly. I sensed an impending reaction and struggled with the intensity of the sensations. Lucia, I'm getting too excited, I stammered. You need to stop. It's okay, Lucia whispered, kissing my neck with compassion. The sensations overwhelmed me, and I held her close as I experienced a profound release. Afterward, as my muscles relaxed and the immediate concerns faded, I felt a rare moment of happiness. Lucia lifted her head and said, Sorry, it seemed like you needed that. When she lifted her head away from my neck, I knew it would be an uncomfortable ride home. I knew it wasn't my intention to let things go that far. I also knew she was right. I did need it. I decided I wasn't going to return to the pleasure palace. The fantasy Lucia had built was too exquisite, and attempting to repeat it would be a waste of time. I pushed the envelope in an attempt to complete the fantasy. I pulled Lucia's lips to mine and kissed her. I wasn't sure what I really expected from the kiss, maybe a slap or a knee to the groin. I just knew that in my slightly drunken stupor, I wanted to kiss my imaginary girlfriend. She surprised me by kissing me back. Her warmth spread through me again as she added passion through her lips. I liked the kiss as much as my earlier experience. It was wonderfully euphoric, and I was able to lose myself again. I usually don't do that, Lucia admitted when she finally broke the kiss. I could tell she was surprised at herself. She sat up, physically announcing the end of our encounter. I just lay there, happy with a silly grin, watching her move. She gave me a strange look, almost on the verge of concern. You know this is a strip club, right? She asked. I assumed she was making sure I wasn't falling for her. Little did she know, I didn't have time to fall for anyone. Yes, I answered, still feeling wonderful inside. And you are a wonderful dancer who is quite possibly the best conversationalist I have ever met. I grinned to ease Lucia's concern. She laughed, and it surprised me how much I enjoyed it. Her eyes lit up, and little crinkles formed at the edges when she laughed. I sat up and looked at the dark spot between my legs. It's going to be a bit embarrassing walking out of here, I said, keeping the grin to make sure she didn't feel bad about it. I wasn't sure why it concerned me. It's dark downstairs. No one will know, Lucia responded with a wicked smile. But you may have to hustle to your car. I laughed at that. She helped me put my shirt back on and pulled me to my feet. I helped tie her bikini top and made sure I touched her more than necessary. Her olive skin was really soft, and she had such a sweet, subtle scent that would tease my brain for the next few days. Here, I said, reaching into my wallet. This is for Sophia. I tipped Lucia $100. You can't take it with you after all. She seemed hesitant to take it. I wasn't sure how long I should hold it out to her. You're not coming back, are you? Lucia asked. She was a lot deeper into my psyche than I thought. I guess she sensed it in the way I tipped. You were wonderful, but no, I won't be coming back, I said, trying to be serious. This place really isn't for me, if you know what I mean. Lucia took the money and hugged me, a deep, friendly hug. She took my hand and led me downstairs to the front door. She said goodbye, kissed me on the cheek, and sent me on my way. It was the last time I ever expected to see Lucia, my wonderful fantasy girl. The roofers and the electrician showed up the following morning. I had a splitting headache. I wished it was from a hangover, but I knew better. The doctors had told me to expect them, and had given me strong pain relievers to thwart the pain. I had decided I wouldn't take the pills unless I became non-functional. I didn't want to lose touch with reality until absolutely necessary. I let the roofers do their thing, and I lent my labor to the electrician, Frank. He was a burly man, one of those guys you would expect to see hefting a beer at the local sports bar. Luckily for me, he was a very efficient electrician. There was very little wasted effort in his movements, and he didn't need to spend a lot of time analyzing what needed to be done. We walked through the house once, and I explained what appliances I expected to put where. When we were done, he had crude sketches of where all the lines would be pulled and where best to bring the new service into the house. I spent the day cutting grooves in the plaster to make way for the new service. The house was constructed before electricity was envisioned, and we had to improvise to pull the service into the rooms. The downstairs was easier since the wires could be pulled in through the basement. The upstairs required more modifications. I tried to keep as much plaster on the walls as possible. I could have ripped it all out and replaced the slats with drywall, but I liked how the plaster gave the house a warm look. The whole time I was working, my mind kept drifting back to Lucia. She seemed to have affected me more than I had thought. She was just an attractive dancer, I told myself over and over. I was amused by the argument I was having with myself. There was no way I could have a relationship, and only an idiot would try one with a dancer. I went back to work with renewed energy. I was happy my headache dissipated before lunch. The next day went better than the previous one. No headache. I had mastered wire pulling, and the roofers were done by noon. My mind still tended to drift to Lucia. I had no idea why I was fixated on her. I guess it was because she was the last woman I had had physical contact with, probably the last female I would ever have any kind of relationship with. It saddened me a bit, but I had known this long enough to let it slide off. I spent the afternoon securing a plumber for next week. The electrician wasn't going to return until the inspector showed up to allow us to connect to the grid. The inspector wasn't available until Friday, 2 days away. So much for my 3-day power dream. I had another early dinner at Rusty's. Diana filled me in on what was happening and quizzed me about how the rehab was going. For such a young girl, she was surprisingly outgoing and articulate. Too bad you can't buy stock in a person's future. Diana was going to go far in life. I promised again to consider attending the Harvest Festival. I was happy to see the apple pie was consistent day to day. That free sample Diana gave me the first day was paying Rusty's good dividends. A quirky idea struck me on my drive home. Knowing the future lets you do things you wouldn't normally do, things you wouldn't even have thought of before. It was silly, selfishly funny, and quite insane. There was no need to save my money. So I decided, what the hell? I pulled into the Pleasure Palace, knowing it was Lucia's day off. Maddie greeted me with a pleasant smile, probably thinking I might become a regular. Lucia is off today, Maddie said. I think I have someone else you might like. Actually, I just wanted to speak with you, I responded with a grin, and not in a naked sense. I added to forestall any anger Maddie might have brewing. She caught the humor and gave me a weak laugh. I dropped enough money last time, so she decided to play nice and listen. How much does Lucia owe you? I asked with a serious face. The expression on Maddie's face was worth the asking. Her eyes kind of bugged out, and she had trouble forming words. I think that's between Lucia and me, Maddie stammered in reply. You dating her, or something? Nope. Haven't seen her since that first night, And don't intend to see her again, I said, smiling. I loved the look of complete confusion on Maddie's face. I just want to pay it off. How much does she owe you? Are you insane? Maddie asked rhetorically. You knew her for, what, 2 hours? How much does she owe? I asked again. 18,000, Maddie replied. Just borrowed more last semester. Why in hell would you do this? Because I can, I said as I pulled out my checkbook. I began filling out a check. And you trust me, it's 18,000. I'll tell her you paid it back. Are you serious? Maddie asked incredulously. Yep. If you were a bank, you would have charged interest, I said with a large smile. What's your last name? Make it out to Magdalene Johnson, Maddie answered. And what should I tell Lucia? Tell her you have a kind heart. Tell her money fell from the sky. I really don't care what you tell her, I said, realizing that I was just giving Lucia choices. Everyone deserves choices, you know. I'm going to wait for this to clear, Maddie said. I am certain you are certifiable. Thank you, Maddie, I said, handing her the check. She shook her head as she took it. Trust me, she can make better use of it than I can, I added seriously. Are you sure you don't want to stick around? I'll buy you another drink, Maddie asked with a smile, a futile attempt to draw more from my wallet. I just laughed and shook my head. I felt really good when I left the pleasure palace for the last time. There were few times in my life when I was actually able to help someone. I could at least look back at this event with a bit of pride. Lucia had made me feel good twice. I needed little miracles like that. I suffered another migraine Thursday afternoon. This one cost me some time as I hid from the sun. I was working on stripping the old layers of paint off the wood siding. When the migraine finally subsided, I attacked the siding with more vigor. I really wanted to complete this house. I probably should have picked a smaller one, but this one had character. I knew in my mind what it would look like when it was done. The real estate agent didn't see it, but she had no vision. Friday was a miraculous day. The inspector was on time and allowed the electrician to complete the connection to the grid. I shamefully yelled, "Let there be light," as I plugged in one of the few lamps I had. That glowing bulb was a beautiful sight. I ran to the kitchen and plugged in the little college dorm refrigerator I had bought and heard its compressor hum. I screwed a bulb into the temporary socket in the ceiling, and with the switch, blessed light filled the room. I flicked the switch on and off a few times, feeling way too much joy for such a trivial event. I could now work outside during the day and inside during the night. It was glorious. Saturday morning, I felt wonderful. I had only one side of the house left to scrape, and I had power. I mounted a set of speakers in the window and plugged them into my phone. I set the app to random shuffle, and Sultans of Swing kicked up loud. My nearest neighbors were a quarter-mile down the road, so it was my world with my sounds. I was singing along poorly while I went to work on the siding, this time with power tools. I have no idea how man survived in the past when electricity wasn't even a dream. I felt like a king tearing into the layers of paint with mechanical speed. I had finished a quarter of the side and was moving the ladder when a red pickup pulled into my dirt driveway. I reached in the window and paused. Maybe my neighbors were closer than I thought. No one came out of the truck, and the sun was glinting off the windshield, so I couldn't see who was inside. I moved toward the vehicle, pulling the dust mask off my face and trying to beat some of the paint dust off my clothes. I shouldn't have been surprised when Lucia stepped out of the driver's door, but I was. I really wasn't prepared to see her again. I stopped walking forward and just stared, trying to think about what I should say. Her black hair was tied in a pigtail with a few errant strands loose in front of her ears. Her expression was confused and must have looked something like mine. I guess she didn't know what to say either. I decided to move forward again. "How did you find me?" I asked to break the ice. I think I made it sound harder than I meant to. "I had breakfast at Rusty's," Lucia answered. "There are no secrets in a small town, not with people like Diana running about." She paused, then added with some difficulty, Why did you do it? I stopped about 20 feet away. It felt like that was the appropriate space we needed. I began to feel a bit stupid since I really didn't have a good reason, at least not one that would make sense to her. Sorry, it seemed like you needed it, I said softly. It sounded better in my mind than it did leaving my lips. Lucia put her hands on her hips and tried twice to say something but did a better job than I had holding it in. She ended up just shaking her head. It's a gift for you and Sophia, I somewhat pleaded. Don't ask why. I was wishing Maddie had been more of a buffer and had claimed it was from her. I just wasn't prepared to support my asinine decisions. People don't do things like that, Lucia yelled. I felt her anger wash over me. It took me by surprise, and I took a step back. I was never good at being yelled at. My defenses kicked in, and I found myself yelling back, finishing with more venom than necessary. I regretted it as soon as I saw the change on Lucia's face. I thought she was about to cry. Then she jumped back in her pickup and slammed the door. I took a few more steps back, thinking she intended to run me over, but instead, she drove off at an angry speed. I kicked myself for being an idiot, just another reason to avoid people altogether. I didn't turn the music back on as I returned to the siding. My happiness was gone, and I needed time to brew it. Luckily, I could take it out on the old paint. I moved the ladder, climbed to the top, and immediately pulled too hard on the power cord, which separated from the extension cord and fell to the ground. I was seething and almost threw the sander. Why did I pay off that woman's debt? Why did I care if it pissed her off? I took a few deep breaths and climbed slowly down the ladder. I tied the two power cords together and plugged the ends together. It would take more than a simple pull to separate them now. I then sat in the grass, wondering why I was feeling like this. 15 minutes later, I climbed the ladder again. This time, I turned the music on and let it change my mood. The work helped, and I began to forget how badly I felt. The old paint soaked up the brunt of my self-disgust. I attacked the layers of paint as vigorously as I could. It wasn't long before I was at least humming to the music again. I hoped I hadn't made Lucia cry. It took all morning to complete that side of the house. It looked much better than the other sides I had done manually. I was contemplating whether I should redo the manual sides with the power sander when the red pickup returned. My stomach did a flip-flop, and the morning pains returned with the vehicle. I promised myself to remain civil and just get it over with. I would let her scream at me so it would end, and I could get on with the rest of my life, what little I had of it. I paused the music and moved toward the pickup with trepidation. Lucia exited the truck with a picnic basket. Her eyes were red, but she was wearing a forced smile. I guess she was finished yelling. I made you lunch, she said in an even tone, waiting for a response. You don't owe me anything, I said stupidly. My mouth once again moved faster than my brain. Let me make you lunch, Lucia stammered, almost pleading. I saw the strain in her eyes. It was hurting her. My pretending that what I did didn't matter wasn't working. My empathy kicked back at me. Actually, I'm starving, I said, adding a smile. Anything in that basket has to be better than the can of spaghetti I had planned to heat up. Lucia's face brightened noticeably, and so did my mood. We moved to the porch steps, the closest thing to furniture I had. This is my table right now, at least until I get the kitchen done, I apologized. It's lovely, Lucia said, spreading out a small cloth on the porch and setting out plates, silverware, and 2 cups. She added a wrapped sandwich on each plate and pulled out a round plastic tray with fresh-cut carrots, broccoli, and cauliflower. A small dish in the center contained what looked like ranch dressing. Lucia absently dipped a carrot and tossed it into her mouth as she pulled out a bottle of white wine. She handed me the bottle and a corkscrew. I went to work as she retrieved 2 carry-out trays from Rusty's. You like the pie, right? Lucia said, almost daring me to deny it. I love the pie, I responded happily. And thank you for lunch. That earned me a real smile. I worked at the cork while Lucia unwrapped the sandwiches, chicken salad, and I could tell they were freshly made. I was hungrier than I thought. The cork popped free, and I was inwardly proud I didn't spill any in the struggle. I filled the 2 plastic cups and lightly reseated the cork in the bottle before setting it down. "I'm sorry I yelled at you," Lucia said, looking at the picnic layout instead of me. I was confused, and I didn't know what to say, and it just came out. I yelled back, "So we're even," I replied, trying to smooth things over. I was never good at smoothing things over. She looked at me with more comfort in her eyes. "Mama told me not to come out here just to pretend I won the lottery," Lucia continued. I loved how she said mama. Her accent was very slight, but came out more clearly with that word. I tried to stop myself but couldn't. I was angry with myself because I didn't know what to say when I got here. "You gave me all that money and tried to tell me it didn't matter." I just went a little crazy. I didn't want to talk about the money again. It was done in my mind. I hoped she would let it go. "You tell your mama everything?" I asked as I took a bite of the sandwich. "This is really good," I added rudely as I chewed. I got another smile from Lucia, a really big one of those that lights up the room. "Mama and I are close," Lucia replied. I could see the truth in her eyes. "It's just the 3 of us. And now that Sophia is away at school, we are even closer. She wants me to quit dancing now. After what you did." I could see some stress in her. I had given her choices, and she wasn't ready to make them. At least she wasn't trying to give the money back. "I agree with your mama," I stated. The wine was sweeter than I usually go for, but it fit with the sandwich and veggies. It would also make a good preamble for the pie. "I've never really done anything else," Lucia added, ignoring the food. "I think the meal was basically made for me. I don't even know how to pay you back." I almost choked on my last bite. I swallowed hard. "The whole point is that you don't pay me back," I said with as much compassion as I could muster. "You'll take the fun out of it if you try." I knew it was coming and didn't have a pat answer. The truth would elicit pity. I needed a good lie. "Why would you do this for me?" Lucia asked. I saw the concern in her eyes. "Look, I'm stinking rich and I can't spend it all, even if I wanted to. Half-truths are better than bold-faced lies. I don't really have any family. I'd rather you and Sophia have a better life than let the government take it all in the end." "You're really that rich?" Lucia asked, trying to justify it all in her mind. "Huge windfall this year," I said, spreading my hands wide apart to emphasize the huge part. "It let me quit my job and rehab this house. I would have made a bad Rockefeller. I couldn't even give away money without making people upset." Lucia just nodded her head. I don't think she fully accepted it yet. She looked at the house still in its dilapidated form. "And this is what you like to do?" she asked, gesturing at the house. "It's my only dream," I admitted. It was actually my only feasible dream. Space travel was still too many years away. "I can paint," Lucia offered, her eyes meeting mine. The next idea that came into my head was really stupid, and my next statement topped the stupidity chart. In my defense, her eyes were really pretty. $25 an hour, and you forget about the loan," I stated firmly. "Done," Lucia answered with one of her big smiles. I knew this would bite me in the bum later, and it was going to take a big chunk of skin, but now she had made me happy a 3rd time. "I've never worked for a rich guy. Do I need an evening dress to paint?" she asked with a big smattering of smartness. I laughed. "Jeans and a t-shirt you don't care about," I answered. Lucia started on her sandwich as I continued with my second half. The rest of the lunch went peacefully. We talked about useless things like how long the weather would hold and other places to eat besides Rusty's. I took her on a tour of the house, explaining my vision of how it would look in each room. She was incredibly enthusiastic about the project and added trim ideas that made sense to me. I'd never shared a dream with someone who agreed with it. It enhanced the dream and made it all that much more dull. "I have to tell Maddie I quit, and I will be here tomorrow at 8, Lucia said as she stuffed the remains of the lunch into the basket. "Tomorrow is Sunday," I stated, thinking she might need the day. "Oh, that's right," Lucia realized. "You're invited to dinner tomorrow, so we'll have to stop working by 5 o'clock. She started toward her pickup. "Dinner?" I asked desperately, looking for clarification. "Yep, with my mama and me," Lucia said as she turned back. "It's non-negotiable, so don't try to get out of it. I know you don't have any plans." I wondered who the boss was on this project. She turned around and literally skipped back to her truck. "See you tomorrow," I called as Lucia disappeared into the cab. For the here and now, hiring Lucia was the best decision I could have made. I grasped at the possibility of finishing the house quickly and moving on before the inevitable occurred. I could get that lucky. I looked at the front of the house and decided that since I now had another painter, spending the time to go over the manual sanding with a power sander made total sense. I spent the afternoon doing just that. There was no sense in an uneven job. Lucia arrived a little before 8 o'clock, incredibly cheerful. She wore some baggy white denim painter pants and an old faded gray t-shirt. Her hair was once again pulled tight behind her head, this time tied in a ponytail with the top wrapped in a scarf. I was barely awake when she entered. I had overslept and was pleased when she decided to make some coffee first. That blessed electric power had paid off again. I had to admit, she filled out a pair of painter pants quite well. "Where should we start?" Lucia asked with too much joy in her voice. She was certainly more pleasant to look at than the drab walls. I had to smile at her unbridled enthusiasm. "Outside," I answered. "Gotta get it done before the cold weather sets in." I had purchased some interior primer and had it colored as close to the final light brown as I could get. I was going to try to get by with only 2 coats, 1 primer and 1 final. I figured we could start on a side and work our way to the front. Once we set a good pattern, it only took us half an hour to get the gear set up to start painting. When Lucia bent down, I had to look away. She really made those pants look good. I used the ladder, and she started on the ground. Every time I reached down to dip my brush, I got a good view of her taking long strokes along the horizontal wooden slats. I had painted the whole side. I wasn't sure if I should be enjoying painting so much. We stepped back to admire our handiwork. "You missed a couple of spots there and there," Lucia pointed out. Sure enough, I had. I looked at the spots that were so blatant from this vantage point. "Damn, I wonder how that happened." "You spent most of your time staring at me," Lucia stated with one of her big smiles. Yes, they were most distracting," I agreed, knowing I wasn't as sly as I thought. I hefted the ladder back to one of the spots. I thought I was being a bit less obvious about it. "I knew you liked them, so I kept them loose," Lucia said seriously. I looked over at her and saw the stress in her face. "You know, the loan and your pay, it doesn't mean." I stuttered for the right words. "It doesn't obligate. This isn't a strip club." "I know," Lucia smiled. "I like you looking. It pleases me." She grabbed a brush, dipped it, and started to climb the ladder. "Hold the ladder," she instructed. I wasn't sure what to say to that. I guess it was in the nature of a stripper to show off. When I looked up, she leaned and started to touch up a spot I missed. I could see straight up her t-shirt to the bottom of her bust. "Truly beautiful," I stated clearly. Lucia just kept painting with more exaggerated strokes. I helped her down and shared a smile. I moved the ladder, and she repeated the process on my other mistake. "Tomorrow the plumber's coming," I said when Lucia descended again. I figured she might want to be more conservative. I knew I wanted her to be more modest. I still had that unwarranted jealousy thing. "If you behave yourself with Mama," Lucia smiled, "I won't tempt the plumber." "Blackmail?" I questioned. "You're resorting to blackmail. What do you think I would say to your mother?" "Just be nice," Lucia reminded me sweetly. I wondered briefly if she would show up naked tomorrow if I was rude to her mama. I smiled inwardly at my thoughts. We were able to get the back of the house primed before we had to call it a day. We were expected at Lucia's mother's house at 6 o'clock, and we both needed to clean up. Lucia surprised me by having a change of clothes and some toiletries in her pickup. We took turns sharing the one bathroom with its dribbling shower. She wasn't used to the lack of hot water like I was. It tends to speed up your shower dramatically. Hopefully, that could be one of the first things the plumber could correct. I was astonished when Lucia walked out of the bathroom. Her raven hair was flowing freely down her shoulders across a white blouse. She was wearing a pleated white skirt that reached her ankles, tied off with a brown woven hemp belt that was cocked lower on the right side. She was simply stunning to look at. "I used all the hot water," Lucia joked. I just stared at her transformation. She smiled when she noticed. "Don't take too long in the shower," she reminded me. I collected my drooling brain and took over the bathroom. The vision of her stayed with me, even in the cold water. The thought of not really dating her but meeting her mother was disconcerting. I felt myself emotionally drifting toward her. Physically, I knew I was attracted to her, but I thought I could keep her at arm's length emotionally. How do you stop something you really don't want to stop? The best I could manage was khakis and a blue polo shirt, which seemed a bit plain compared to Lucia's attractive attire. But she seemed pleased. I made a point of opening the car door for her. There's something about a well-dressed woman that makes you want to be more chivalrous. We all know we should open doors, but it had been a long time since I'd rushed ahead to do so. Lucia accepted it in stride. On the way, I was lectured about Lucia's mother. She wasn't extremely religious, but taking the Lord's name in vain was forbidden, and swearing in general was frowned upon. Lucia had worked as a dancer, not a stripper, though she assured me her mother knew exactly what the pleasure palace was. I was not to bring up Lucia's father, not even to Lucia, and I was also advised to avoid topics that might drift toward the annexation of Texas from Mexico in the 1800s. It seemed Mama held strong opinions on the subject. Fully briefed, we pulled up in front of a small one-story home in what looked like a nice family neighborhood. I hustled around the car to open Lucia's door. She was calmly waiting for me and smiled when I did. I was beginning to wonder if there was anything I wouldn't do to earn that smile. I already knew things were getting out of control and kicked myself for letting them. Mama was waiting at the door. She was a little shorter than Lucia, but had the same thick black hair. Mama carried a bit more weight, but with dignity and grace. She wore a flowered dress covered by a white apron. God help me, her smile matched her daughter's. The two hugged like they hadn't seen each other in years. I almost felt forgotten until Lucia finally introduced me. "Mama, this is Todd Keystone," Lucia said proudly. It was uncomfortable to be presented in that way. I sensed some kind of permanence in Lucia's tone. "Hello," I said, holding out my hand. Mama took my hand and pulled me into a hug. I was surprised at the warmth of it. It felt like we had known each other for years. I hugged back. "What else do you do when embraced like that?" Aunt Maria called. "She's on the phone in the bedroom," Mama said to Lucia with a strong accent. "Go say hello. Todd, help me in the kitchen." Lucia reluctantly headed to the back of the house. Mama grabbed my hand and drew me into the kitchen. She turned to me with a very serious look on her face. "Why'd you give my Lucia money?" Mama asked. I could see she wasn't angry yet. I looked back toward the direction Lucia had gone, hoping she would come and save me. "Maria, keep Lucia busy while we talk," Mama continued, knowing I was stalling. She seemed to need it. I answered without confidence. I tried to do it anonymously. I was just giving her more choices. I shrugged, knowing it was a weak explanation. She chased me down. I really didn't mean to see her again. Mama was searching my face with her eyes. When I sensed she was afraid to make a choice, I offered her the painting job. The whole thing kind of snowballed. Honestly, it made me happy to help, although there were some uncomfortable moments. Mama looked into my eyes. "I believe you," she stated. She reached up with both hands and pulled my cheek to her lips, kissing me. "That's for stopping Lucia from dancing." She released me with a smile. I smiled back, sharing the nice moment. She turned to the stove where a few pots were steaming, lifted the lid on a pot, and began to stir the contents with a wooden spoon. "How long will it take you to fix the house?" Mama asked as she tasted the sauce, and then added additional spice. "I'm not sure. Maybe 4 months with Lucia's help," I replied, wishing I knew where this was going. "After it's done, you leave?" Mama asked. I cringed. This was the part I had been ignoring, the part I hoped would solve itself, though I knew it couldn't. I was thankful she was watching the pots and not my face. "Yes," I answered, not wanting to elaborate. It wasn't like I had a choice in the matter. "You leave my Lucia?" Mama didn't hesitate with the follow-up. I could hear the concern in her voice, a tenseness in her stance. "Yes," I said quietly. For some reason, lying didn't even occur to me. Mama's shoulders slumped, and she turned back to me. "Lucia doesn't dress like this for nobody," Mama whispered, wagging the spoon at me. "She never brings anybody to see me." My heart felt heavy. Everything had already spiraled out of control, and I just didn't see it coming. "Tell her soon, okay?" The anguish in her voice was overpowering. "I'll try," I whispered back. I think Mama saw my pain, and her face went all confused. "Why'd you leave if you feel like that?" Mama asked. God, the woman could read my mind. I had no response to offer her, nothing I wished to share. I also couldn't lie. "I have to," I stated firmly. "It's not something I have any control over." Mama gave me a strange look. Then her face firmed up. She thought about it for a moment, then nodded her head. "Tell her nicely, not mean," Mama whispered, the spoon still ready. "In your own time." At least I could promise her that. I was about to agree when she poked her head out of the kitchen and called down the hall, "Lucia, tell your aunt to call back. You have a guest here." I guessed the agreement was a foregone conclusion. Dinner was a very cordial affair. Lucia was all smiles, and Mama seemed to love seeing Lucia happy. The food was excellent, a Mexican-influenced sausage medley with some really tasty brown rice. Mama seemed overjoyed when I had 3 helpings. I thought I was being greedy, but it was just that you don't know when you'll get food like that again. I excused myself after dessert to use the bathroom. When I returned, Lucia's face was glowing. They had obviously been talking about something, quite possibly me. I tried to get a hint from Mama's face, but it was unreadable. I let it go since neither had included me in the discussion. When we left, Mama hugged me away from Lucia. "Be nice," she whispered and kissed my cheek. I nodded, moved to the car, and again made sure I opened the door for Lucia. I had dug a deep hole, realizing that now Lucia's smile was making me dig it deeper. "Mama likes you," Lucia said proudly. "She thinks you're honest and a good person." I already told her that, but now she believes me. I felt my stomach turn over. I grinned at the compliment and struggled for a new topic. "Your mother sure can cook," I said, trying to change the subject. That sausage thing was something else. I don't think I've had anything like it before. "What did Mama want to talk to you about?" Lucia asked curiously. I guess the phone call hadn't fooled her. "She was just looking out for you," I said, trying to avoid the truth. Lucia smiled and accepted it at face value. "So did you like her?" Lucia asked. "Absolutely. She's wonderful," I said honestly. Lucia beamed, and I realized I had just dug myself in a little deeper. I think I had just reached some important milestone for Lucia. The first part of the story has ended. The second part will be out soon, and the link will be in the description below the video. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.